Hi guys, and today we're going to be talking about the latest release from none other than Fit for an Autopsy called Of What the Future Holds. Now, what can I say about this band? I've been really enjoying them for the past few releases. Ever since the days of the Great Collapse, I've been hooked and could not stop listening to them with every release they've come out. Their previous one, The Sea of Tragic Beasts, was definitely one of my favorites back in 2019. Having just a new vision for the band, having a lot more rhythm, a lot more groove, and incorporating some of those Gojira-esque characteristics into their music, which are so great and are so unique. And what they've done with it is pretty much taking that kind of a Gojira approach to writing, but definitely have had their own twist on it, which, can't go wrong with that. It's Gojira, but heavier. And now with this latest release, it seems they're going even more experimental with their sound, especially on the vocals as well, having more of a Gojira aspect to them, and even in one track, Two Towers, going full-blown Deftones with their intro. I can clearly tell they must have really liked that latest Deftones album, because you can kind of hear it here. But overall, as an album, it is quite the treat, with its opening being the title track of What the Future Holds, having this really ominous, haunting intro that really builds and builds until we finally get this huge break moment where we get a breakdown with vocals really setting up the scene for the entire album. It's really powerful, it's really gut punching, it really gets you in the mood for something intense that's gonna happen. Following that, we get the track Pandora, continuing the onslaught of just riffs that are so juicy. Not gonna lie, these are some of the best riffs I've ever heard in a metal album, and considering this is the start of the year, I am looking forward to see how bands compete with such mind-blowing, destructive riff writing. Now, moving on, we also have the track Far From Heaven, which, if I'm right, was the first single that came out for this album, and not gonna lie, I did do a reaction to it, so you can go check that out for a more in-depth look, but to pretty much sum it up, it reminded me a lot of Gojira. In fact, too much like Gojira, to the point where I thought it was Gojira at the start. Specifically, if you've heard the track Another World by Gojira, you would probably be baffled when you first listened to this track, because you would probably think you were listening to that track by Gojira. And this gets on to the point where it's like, even though this band is very diverse, very unique in their writing, and very outgoing, there's definitely some times where they really show their influence on their sleeve. Far From Heaven is one of them for sure. Another great example is the track Two Towers, where the opening has this very sort of Chino Moreno vibe to the vocals, very haunting, very quiet, very in the back, but almost definitely a Deftones vibe. Not to say I don't like it, but it's very obvious when they do show off their influences. When it comes to the track In Shadows, this was another single that came out prior to the release of the album, and this is definitely a heavy hitter from start to finish, riff after riff after riff, pummeling you non-stop. And then when you think it can't get any more heavy, the ending breakdown just shows that no, you are wrong, it can get heavier, and the writing on it is top notch. Definitely more of a slammier sort of hardcore feel with the guitar parts, and definitely a statement piece of how heavy the band can get. But there's one track I think on this album that really stood out for me when it comes to the album as a whole, and that was the track Two Towers. Now initially when I heard this track was coming out, and initially when I saw even the name, I thought, is this a Lord of the Rings reference? And you'd probably think the same thing because of the name Two Towers. So I was a bit apprehensive going into it, but I can tell you now, this track is probably one of my favorite tracks that has come out in a long time. Being so grandiose, being so beautiful in its writing. And this is of course the track that has that Chino Moreno style vocals in the opening. But after that, it goes straight into the actual riffs, and man, they're so beautiful to hear. Having these galloped notes going over and over and over again, and then leading into this very sort of epic almost chorus where it just all comes together. Followed by this, we also have a great interlude which consists of these really pummeling guitar parts and this melody behind it before we get this really juicy, almost creamy solo to really tie it all up. I think Two Towers was my favorite track off the album. I think it's a high point for sure. And being at the middle of the album, it really gives that sense of a climactic moment and also ties up the first half of the album. I think it's a great track. Definitely my favorite out of the album. And then after that, we get something kind of interesting with the track A Higher Level of Hate. Now with this opening, it completely stumped me as to what instrument it was that was playing. It sounded like a basketball to me, but it also had this timbre of a bass guitar, but it also could have been some toms. So write down below if you know what that is. And also give this video a like if you're enjoying the review so far and want to see more like it. And overall, I did like the intro, and even it was slowly transitioning into the main riff, However, it did get sloppy on the overall transition. Instead of building it up and blending it seamlessly into the main riff, they sort of did a very abrupt shift, and initially hearing it, it didn't make any sense to me and just sounded a bit off. Great intro idea, I just wish it was executed a bit better going into the main riff. And when it comes to the second half of the album, they definitely go for balls to the wall heavy riffs that are beautiful. There's some amazing riffs throughout this. Collateral Damage, definitely one of the heavier ones. Savages as well, and Conditional Healing, all having their own flair of heaviness, all unique in their own right. It was very easy to distinguish between one track to the next, and I could clearly tell that they put a lot of work into this, and I really enjoyed it. Tying this all up, we have The Man That I Was Not, which sees the band going slightly more progressive in their writing, having a very ominous, slow opening, building until our heaviness comes back in with the main riffs, the verse part, and the choruses. And then sort of prematurely going back into this sort of fake ending that eventually comes back into another heavy part. And then does the very slow fade out. And I'm glad that they chose this track and this track only to do the slow fade out, because I've heard albums before where bands tend to do the slow fade out quite a bit in their album, and I find that it just slows everything down. Well, for them, they chose specifically to do it at the end, and I think it was a good choice. So overall, I love the album. It's not the greatest album on earth, but it's definitely an absolute solid piece of work, which is what Fit for an Autopsy is. I find that they'll never push the boundaries too hard, but you'll always get a solid album out of them with high quality on all sides. And now I just want to quickly touch on the mix job by none other than Will Putney, who's also the guitarist of the band. And once again, I love his mix jobs. For some reason, he just finds a way to make every instrument sound real, but also huge at the same time. The drums are sounding big and massive. The drums sound big and massive, but they don't feel like a robot is playing them. It feels very natural, very organic sounding with a good bit of saturation and room. The guitars all are bright, but also have this really cool chunkiness that you can only really get from using a proper sort of amp and cab setup. And the bass is always a part of the band that you could easily MIDI, or you could easily quantize to make it really solid, but I like the fact that it's a real bass. It's got this warmth to it, and it's got this nice groove to it, even though it's technically not a very groovy band. So I love that as well. And when it gets chunky, it gets real chunky, and it just adds that level of weight to the mid-range section that is so good. But anyway, I would definitely recommend this to everyone to check out, whether you're into the heavier side of metal or not. I think it's a great album with a lot there for everyone to enjoy. And with that, I'll be giving it a 8 out of 10. So if you enjoyed this review, give it a like. Of course, subscribe to keep updated on more reviews and streams coming up. And besides that, thank you for watching, stay hydrated, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!